All right. So, well, my name is Felix, as you said, and I'm going to talk about CSS on the desktop. And of course, the first question is, well, what does that even mean, CSS on the desktop, right? What am I talking about here? And what I'm talking about is a little side project of mine called Widget. It's a Mac app at the moment that I was hacking around in my free time in Linux, and it started as a personal itch to scratch, which is always the best, I find, to keep you motivated and to keep working on your side projects. And so what was that itch, right? So I've been using a Mac app called Geek Tool for a while. There's something similar on Linux as well, it's Conky and other things like that. And well, what it is, I mean, if you have to say it in a sentence what it does, it takes a shell command, system commands, and shows the output on the desktop. But that's of course a bit abstract, so it's better to just look at it to understand what's going on. So this is a screenshot of somebody's desktop, and you can see there's sort of, things going on here and some stuff here. So that's all these are called widgets, or they call them geeklets actually in the Geek Tool. And basically, yeah, there's just an output of shell commands that you see here. So for example, I'm doing that little table with all running processes. It's quite small, I know, but yeah. You can see the memory usage and the CPU usage, and you can, this is stuff from the calendar, I guess. And, so it's basically a sort of a monitoring tool that you can use. And I always found it quite useful. I mean, I always kept an eye on, some processes are running that shouldn't be running, or something taking too much memory. So I always had fun with that. And it's also just a bit pinboy desktop kind of thing. Not this one, doesn't look very nice. You can make it look nicer. Just to give you a tiny bit more of an idea how it works. So you would, in Geek Tool, you would sort of define a rectangle on the screen. And then you have a little configuration window where you could specify the shell command, which is something with dates, I guess, in this case. And then you can configure a few things like the font size, color, and all those kind of things. And of course, you can resize that thing and you can move it around on the desktop, position it where you want. So that's Geek Tool. But so, what is the problem with it, right? Why not just use Geek Tool? So the biggest issue I had with it, it's not responsive to different screen sizes. And by that I mean, if you take a widget and you put it in the top right corner of the screen, it's positioned relative to your top left corner in absolute pixels. And so if you plug in a different screen, then this widget is going to be, if the screen is larger, it's going to be in the middle of the screen. If the screen is smaller, it's going to be outside. So that was always quite annoying because I would take my laptop to work, plug in a different screen, and all the widgets would be in the That was pretty bad. The next thing is limited layout support. So to do something like that table that you saw, it's actually quite painful because you're only dealing with plain text. So if you want to do something like like column layout or whatever, you have to use string padding with white space, and you have to use mono-size fonts for that, of course, these kind of things. So that was always annoying as well. And then you get for example, a program that has a long name, and all of a sudden the layout just breaks. So I found it quite hard to make the output layout nicely. And the third one, that was not so much a big issue, but sort of a nice to have. You cannot do natively charts and graphs. For example, in Linux and Conky, you have these little CPU bars, for example, that you can use and those kind of things. And in Geek Tool, I've seen some people sort of hack it in. I'm not sure quite how they manage, but it takes quite some effort. There's no native support. So, working a lot with HTML5, web apps, these kind of things, I thought, if this thing was done in HTML5, all these problems would go away, right? For example, if I had CSS, I could just say, position top 10 pixels, right 10 pixels, and that thing is going to stay on the right edge of the screen, no matter what, no matter how big the screen is. So that would solve, my issue with the responsive screen sizes. And you could even go overboard, using media queries. You could have, for example, a widget that shows more or less information depending on the size of your screen. So yeah. And then, laying out text, that's actually sort of what the HTML was made for. So a text layout is very easy, of course. You can make sure that text stays within a box, that it flows inside it, that you line it to the left, line it to the right, all those kind of things. You could stick that stuff into tables if you want to. So that kind of table that you saw would be very easy to do. So that would also solve my second problem. And finally, of course, if you do want to use graphs, charts, there's all the tools like SVG, canvas, you can do basically anything you can imagine. And of course, this being the idea would be that this being a web app, you can sort of choose the browser running engine that supports this nicely. So that would actually, all these things already, that would solve all my issues like detail. But further, I thought, if I would do this, it would be relatively easy from a developer point of view, because I wouldn't have to provide a UI for all the configuration options. You just use CSS, people can do what they want, and I don't have to give a nice UI where you can set font size and all that kind of stuff. And also for the users, if you think about the target group, maybe some more text-heavy people, everybody knows a bit of HTML and CSS, so that's also relatively easy to use. And the last point, it's a bit similar to the first one. Again, because I don't have to provide a UI, you're also not limited by the UI I provide. So if I forget to add an option to change, the border color, then you're out of luck normally. But with CSS, you can just customize anything, even things I didn't think about. After thinking about this, doing this in HTML5 would be a big win. And so I went, and I'm going to show you what I came up with. So that's my just my desktop here, and I'm going to start the app now. So yeah, here we go. As promised, CSS on the desktop, right? But so what's happening here? So what you see here is, of course, a widget. It's a very stupid one, but it doesn't do much useful. It's a widget. So what Widget does, it actually looks for here it is. It looks for a folder on your system that you can configure, of course. I'm going to open it here, and it looks for JavaScript files within that folder. So you can see this one is actually that demo widget here that you see. And it's a CoffeeScript file. I don't know if you know CoffeeScript, but it's sort of like JavaScript. It compiles into JavaScript. So you can use both. You can use JavaScript and CoffeeScript. But CoffeeScript is a bit nicer for writing widgets because of the string interpolation syntax. You might see later what I mean with that. So let's look at this widget now. I have my text editor open here. Smaller. And so this is now the contents of the file. Can you sort of read this? So that's basically a minimal widget in Widget, how you would write one. So this you're just defining a JavaScript object here, and it's looking for some key attributes. The only one you really need is the command one, which is obviously the shell command that the widget runs. In this case, echo is just the command that just prints whatever you give it afterwards, and just prints CSS. And that then gets sent to the front end and printed on the screen. And of course, if you would do something a bit more useful than just a static text, you might want to show that changing as well. So you want to refresh your widget. So you can control this with this. This is refresh frequency in milliseconds. So this right now redraws every second, but you don't see it because it's just the same every time. And finally, you have the style, which does exactly what you think it does. So you can go here and change some things here, change the color. I don't know, change the font size if you want. Right? And of course, you can move it around on the screen where you want it. And this being a web app sort of thing, you get all the tools that you have in the browser as well. So I can open a debug console here, for example. But this is just, I cannot make this bigger unfortunately, but this is just the standard WebKit called Safari actually debug console. And then you can sort of see what's actually happening here. So my whole desktop is just one big browser view right now. So this is my widget, this is just a div. Here you see the style that we just applied to it. And that's really all there is to it. Well, let's have a bit of fun with this. Let's do something a tiny bit more useful, right? So I have a command prepared here that I will just copy and paste. So this command gives you the CPU usage at the moment. So using top, basically. It takes a second to run. And there you have it. There you can see my current CPU usage, and you can see it updating every second. So yeah, that's already a bit more useful. But of course, you don't always want to just show the output as you get it straight from the command. You might also want to do something to the output. So what you can do is you can define a render method, which gets the output of the command passed into the string. And the default implementation will just return it again, and whatever you return will get rendered as HTML. This is Scottish script, by the way, so you don't have to say return. Whatever you type last in the function, it's returned. So that's why it works. But you can also, of course, do something now with the output. I mean, first of all, you can just add stuff to it. And of course, we can also, instead of just rendering text, you could also render some HTML. Jump down there because H1 will add, yeah. So yeah, this is now the H1 style. You can actually look at this again in the console, see what's going on. Yeah, there's our H1 now, of course. There's the big padding there. And of course, you can also maybe, let's say, parse the output. So in this case, you do something simple. Like, this. So that works as well, obviously. Well, let's do something. Let's think a tiny bit more out of the box. What else you could do with this? Hey, welcome. You don't have to only just use the number for displaying it. You could also use. I mean, it's a number, right? So you could actually use it to, let's say, control something like, let's say, the height of a div maybe, right? So let's do that. So let's do what we first going to do. We're going to actually create our div here. It's going to give it a class so we can style it. And we want to set the height on it. Right. Here's the div here. And then, of course, we have to give a style for this div now. So we can do that here. Let's give it a width. And some colors, so we can see it. And let's make sure it stays centered on the screen. So you probably noticed by now this is not exactly CSS, right? So I'm actually using Stylus here, which is a CSS preprocessor. I'm going to go into it a bit more later why and how. But it's basically like I don't know if you know SAS or CSS. So basically, it's like CSS, but you don't have to use the semicolons and no curly brackets. But basically, this is the style that gets applied to the widget itself, and then of course you can add any other rules here. So this will target our div here. Let's see if that does anything. You can see it very small now here, the little CPU bar. But of course my CPU is not doing much, so I'm going to actually pull the command here to kick it. There we go. So now you can see that little CPU bar changing as my CPU usage changes. That's already quite neat. But as you see, the thing it just updates, jerkily kind of thing. That's because render will just replace the DOM every time. So every time you run your command, it will replace the inner HTML with whatever you return here. And it would be nice, right, if you have CSS, so you could do something like transition height, sometime there, right? But this won't work immediately because, as I said before, this will just re-render the DOM every time. That's not what you want. You actually want to keep your DOM tree updated some attributes. And you can do that. You can define an update method. It also gets the output passed in. And you also get the reference to the DOM element, which is the DOM element of the widget, basically. And here it doesn't matter what you return, just whatever you do inside will happen. So if you define a render method, update method, it will first call render the first time, and then afterwards update. Otherwise, it will keep calling render. And then you have jQuery available. So we can get a reference to our bar here. And we can change the height. Yes. Grab that from here, we don't need that here anymore. And we don't need all this anymore. Right. So let me kick the bar in a bit. Now you can see it updated with a nice little animation instead of just and finally, to show off a tiny bit, I have a bit more complex widget prepared here, which I'm not going to type it for you, just going to copy and paste it. It's the same idea, same command, but now instead it's going to show the history of bars. If you make space for that. Save that here. You can see it popping up there in the corner. Some little animations. There you go. So yeah, so that's a bit more of an idea, you know, like we haven't even used any graphics library or whatnot. You can just do quite nice things with just, you know, plain CSS and HTML already, and some JavaScript. So, and also, you know, just to give you an idea, I mean, this is a bit more of a complex widget, it's not too bad. But even so, you know, if you would get this from somebody else, you could probably look at it a bit and think, oh, okay, here's my style for the bar, change the color. Because I like red so much. And you know, you could do lots of things. You know, you could go crazy, maybe even flip the whole thing sideways, have the bars going that way. So it's very customizable. That was the whole idea behind it. So yeah, I think maybe to round this off, I'm going to give you more of a, show you more of a standard user. So I'm going to show my normal setup here, give you more of an idea how you might really use this. So here you can configure your widgets folders. I'm going to go to my standards folder there. So this is my standard sort of setup. So I have some widgets here to, this is a bit cut off, but okay. To show CPU usage, here's the memory usage, weather forecast, obviously. This is actually written by a colleague of mine, sitting over there. So this is actually talking to the API of our continuous integration environment. So these are our latest builds, and who broke it? I broke it as well, yes.
Notice how my name's not there.
No, lucky. So yeah, it's you don't have to only monitor stuff on your machine. You can also get talk to external APIs, get server logs, whatever. You can really do whatever you would like actually. So that is Widget. So much for the demo. This is somehow. There we go. So I'm going to quickly go over how it actually works. I had another talk about it in a lot more detail, but you can maybe ask me more questions later if you like. So the biggest part of the app is a Node.js app, so it's actually all written in JavaScript, most of it. So there's a Node.js backend, so that's the thing that reads the widgets or the JavaScript files from the file system, and it watches what it changes, which is why I could do this live editing sort of thing. And then it sends the widget to the front end, and also it will run the shell commands and send those to the front end. And the front end is what you saw. It's basically one massive WebKit browser view that I'm sticking to the desktop basically. It's actually maybe something to mention. It's on all the desktops. It doesn't interfere with the normal desktop, obviously. Drag my folder over here. So it's just really in the background. And yeah, that obviously renders the widgets. And then there's of course the native app which you need, and that's basically the thing that ties all the pieces together. So that's the one that actually provides that full screen web view, sticks it to the desktop, and it bundles Node so you don't have to install Node, and it also runs the server task. So it actually runs the Node.js app. So yeah, that is basically it for the demo. So that's the app. It's available online. It's open source. There's a link to the GitHub page. So it's Mac only at the moment, but as I said, most parts are written in Node, so it should be actually somewhat easily portable. And there's also a website where you can download widgets to all the ones you saw, and now you can download, and you can also upload your own if you like. It would actually be nice if anybody has a cool idea. Let me know, I can also help out with it. So to round this talk off a bit, I thought, this is CSS HTML leader. Maybe it's also nice to talk about not just about the advantages of using HTML5 for this, but also maybe some of the downsides or the challenges I faced, or I'm still facing some of them. So maybe there's even some feedback on how to solve this for you guys. More of like a discussion around. So it's the first issue that always is there is leaking CSS. Right? The C part, the cascading part of CSS is a bit of it makes it work, but it's also a bit of a pain. So what I mean by this is you don't want your style for one widget to affect another widget, right? If I define an H1 style in one of my widgets, I don't want it to mess up all other widgets on the screen. So you really want your CSS styles for a widget to be just for that one widget, and that one widget only. So, I mean, the common solution is, of course, you have to scope your styles, add an ID to every rule, for example, or use unique names, and of course, you don't want to make that a responsibility of people writing widgets. So that brings me actually back to why I'm using Stylus. And you can find it here in the URL. So as I said before, it's a CSS preprocessor. It cleans up the syntax so that you can use, you don't have to use semicolon, curly brackets. It also does other things like takes care of all the vendor prefixes, so you can just say box shadow, for example. And you can do variables, all this kind of thing. It's quite nice, so I have always enjoyed it. But I was a bit wary of using it in this project, because even though I sort of enjoy it, but it's not standard CSS, so it means for other people they would have to learn something new, it's not standard kind of thing. But why I finally went with it anyway is the way you can scope stuff in Stylus. So what you see up there is the normal CSS way of how you would, for example, scope the style to a widget by giving the widget ID, adding it to every rule. Whereas in Stylus you can do it like this. This is exactly the same. If you indent your styles, that will be scoped with that selector above it. So it's a bit of an implementation detail, but this made it very easy to implement. Because in this case, I would have to parse the CSS, go over all the rules, append the widget ID in front of it. Whereas here I can just take the whole CSS string, indented by 2 spaces, and stick the widget ID in front of it. My widgets, my styles are scoped. There was a bit of a laziness on my part, you could say. And it has downsides. There's one thing you cannot do like this, and that is keyframe animations. You cannot put a keyframe animation in another selector, it has to be by itself. So at the moment, if you type a keyframe animation in the style of the widget, it will give a syntax error because you try to scope it. But that's not very good. You can work around it. You can return a style tag from your render method. Just stick your keyframe animation in there. But it won't be scoped. So if you use an animation called spin, and someone else has a widget, they also have an animation called spin. Yeah, problems. So I think the only way around it is really you parse the CSS and also parse the keyframe rules, and then append the widget name in front of the keyframe rules, and then replace all the occurrences and kind of thing. It's just more complex. Yeah. So yeah, if anybody has a better idea, it's also welcome to hear that. Also, I want to see first if there's a big issue if people want to use keyframe animations a lot. We'll see. Then the next and actually last challenge. It's another common issue I find with HTML and CSS. It's separation of layout and style. So what I'm talking about here is you have a style for a button, let's say, and that includes the background color, let's say, the font it uses, how the text aligned in the button. So that's all stuff about the style of the button. But then there's also things, CSS among those two together. There's also, for example, the width of the button. Is that part now of the layout? Is it part of the style? And of course, sometimes you want to position the button specifically somewhere using some position absolute maybe. Then you have a style like top somewhere, top 10 pixels. And if you put that in the base style, right, if you want to reuse that button on a different page, different screen, somewhere, different situation, then you have to first undo all that positioning style that you inherited. So that's also like very handy. So in Widget you have the same problem, because when you write a widget, as you saw, I also typed the position of the widget in CSS. And so if you download someone else's widget, you're going to get his position on their screen. And most of the time, if it's positioned well, it works out fine, you know, if you use something like relative positioning. But if somebody positions it somewhere that is outside of your screen, you download the widget, it seems like it's not working. So that's still an issue. But that's actually also the first feedback I got from people using it. Also, you know, you download the widget, the first thing you want to do is you want to put it where you want it. And at the moment you have to open the file, change the CSS and all that stuff. So I'm working actually on a solution that is a bit similar to Tool again, which is, you know, you can drag and drop widgets. But that was of course the thing that why I wrote Widgets in the first place. I cannot do that. So the UI has to be a bit more complicated. You want to be able to specify what edges you want to position it to, and not just move it around. So I have a sort of a prototype of it. I think it's going to work out, but we'll see. And I think that mostly was a very short talk. Mostly wraps it up. Thank you for listening, and I don't know if you have any questions. Like half an hour to run on.
All right, let's give you a big round of applause, Tom.